ruled by a local elite. After the death of Shemshi Adad, the entire network, the small network of states, begins to fall apart. But the Old Assyrian period is known best for texts dealing with a trading colony, its relationship to a trading colony far in the north, which is called Kultepe Kenesh. You can see here, it's in the center of Anatolia, quite far to the north. This is an interesting site. It's a very large mound near the modern city of Caesarea in Cappadocia. And again, it's located at the juncture of a major north-south and east-west trade route. You can see right here, being central, it occupied a very important place. The city mound itself is 550 meters in diameter. You can see here it rises about 20 meters above the lower plain. It's got a lower city that extends about 3 kilometers in the south. And the lower town is actually only occupied during the first centuries of the second millennium, the period we're talking about. And the site was first discovered when a number of cuneiform tablets ended up on the antiquities market. The tablets identify the site as being Kanesh, which was known locally as Nesha, and it's the capital of this region during this time. They also relate a number of, quite a bit of information concerning a large colony of Assyrians that were living in the city during that time. And in Akkadian, this term is called Karum, K-A-R-U-M, sort of a trade colony that had been set up to facilitate long-distance trade. So we have Assyrians living very far to the north during this time. I'm going to jump up here, right? So here's Ashur, and again, here's Kanesh, where this trade colony was set up. So we see long-distance trade beginning to really flourish after the fall of the Ur III state. Of course, this is taking place much earlier, right? Even Sargon said that he saved a number of merchants in this area at one point. We've looked at his seal impressions, fragments of a stele of Sargon from Diyarbakir. So we know that Mesopotamia has had a lot of interest in this region and a presence in this region in the past. But as far as the establishment of a permanent trading colony, this is a first during the Old Assyrian period. It's very active, this trade, and it appears to be based primarily on the trade of tin and fine textiles, where we have tin that's coming far from the east. It's being probably brought in from Iran. Tin is difficult to source. Actually, there's a lot of disagreement about where it's coming from, but the general consensus is that a lot of tin is coming in from Iran. And it's being traded and brought up to places like Ashur, along with fine textiles, and then everything is being shipped up north to Kanesh. Whoops. In return, Anatolia, which is very rich in natural resources, is shipping gold and primarily silver back to Ashur during this time. So tin and textiles being traded for gold and silver. We don't think of tin as being particularly important, right? Aluminum and tin. Well, no, those are different. I think of aluminum foil, tin foil, but it's tin is kind of this base metal that we don't really use, but it's actually extremely important during this time. In fact, in some instances, can be valued close to, say, silver. Why would tin be so important? Any idea? Any thoughts on why tin? Trying to think of how to phrase this in an interesting way. In short, tin, when you mix tin with copper, what do you get? Bronze, exactly, right. So this issue is not about tin, but it's about bronze. Bronze, which when, as we've seen, smelted, creates a super hard, very useful metal that can be used in tools, but primarily weapons, arrowheads, swords, these sorts of things. Anatolia doesn't have access to tin and therefore can't make bronze. You can actually make bronze with copper and arsenic. There are arsenic bronzes, but they're not nearly as good as tin bronzes. So Anatolia has a very strong interest in tin during this time, and they're willing to trade to get it. The texts that we have both in Ashur and in Kanesh tell us a tremendous amount about this trade and the way that it was organized. First off, we had trade that was not sponsored by the state, but it was actually sponsored by merchant families who were based in Ashur, who would underwrite all the costs of these expeditions to the north. Ashur at this time doesn't really seem to have a strong centralization. Instead, it seems to be a collection of households and elders, members who would stay in Ashur, these senior members of these almost firms, these trading firms, with junior members who would end up traveling with these caravans up to Kanesh and make the grueling journey. This is an overland caravan, of course, done by donkey. It's 800 kilometers. It would have taken about 50 days in one direction. It's still a very effective means of travel, especially when you consider this region as very mountainous and treacherous. Donkey caravan is still used in many parts of the world today that require travel over difficult landscapes. And we see in these texts from Kanesh and from Ashur that a donkey could carry about 30 textiles, or 10 and 130 mina of tin. 10 mina were kept sort of aside for travel and taxation. We have some of the tax records. If you traveled through a city, for example, and you needed to stay the night, you would pay a small amount. 1/20th of your consignment would be given to the officials at Ashur once you left. 2/65ths were taken from you upon entering Kanesh, and along the way we have evidence of people trying to cheat this system and sneak in, but laws were put in place that if you didn't pay your taxes along the way, your entire consignment could be seized. So there was risk of confiscation. As soon as you arrived in Kanesh, we're told you would then end up selling off your donkeys, selling off your tin, your textiles, and then come back home by boat primarily through the river and bringing what should have been at that time a hefty profit. The site of Karam itself is very interesting. There are 4 levels of this site, with the upper level having 2 phases. The levels, the bottom levels, which date to around 2000 to 1900, levels 3 and 4. We don't have any text during this time, but we know that Karam was occupied. It's during level 2, which dates to around 1880 to 1820, that we have quite a bit of texts and really interesting architecture during this period. You can see a reconstruction here of this trading colony. A trading colony that was destroyed eventually by fire, and that's why we have so much. It's a town with clearly paved streets and drainage channels, and clearly planned out ahead of time. This is similar to what we saw at Habuba Kabira in terms of a trading colony that's purpose-built. It's planned in sections with clearly delineated areas and surrounded by an outer perimeter wall. We see houses which are 2 to 6 rooms, often with a second story. And these houses would have had an archive room, office space, right, for keeping track of these documents, probably in the upper level. We find bathtubs, hearths, ovens, and these large archives. Again, in some cases up to 14,000 tablets, keeping track of what is coming and what is going between Kanesh and Ashur. Everything, again, written in Akkadian. The daily pottery, however, all the architecture, this form of house, the things that are being used on a daily basis, this pottery is Anatolian, however. Unlike Habuba Kabira, where we saw all these attributes of Uruk material culture, at Kanesh, everything is strictly Anatolian. We have these wonderful zoomorphic vessels, for example. that are highly burnished in the form of bulls and lions and eagles, antelopes, rabbits, totally Anatolian in style, which is quite interesting. The Assyrians that are coming to this place are adopting Anatolian traditions and living in a very Anatolian style. Let's jump ahead here. So really, in a lot of ways, the only reason that we know this system existed, and this is sort of an archaeological cautionary tale, are these texts in Akkadian, which tell us about the system, about the trading taking place, and how the system worked. If it wasn't for these texts being found in these areas, we wouldn't know that Assyrians lived there because they blended in so perfectly with these Anatolians. The letters that we find there are particularly revealing of the personalities and thoughts expressed during the period in the words of the writer. We have this one, for example, from around 1900 BCE. It's sent by Urtu Ili, a senior member of a firm based in Ashur, to Inam Ashur, one of these junior partners who would have been stationed in the colony, who would have made this journey all the way to the northwest. And he writes, "This is important. No dishonest man must cheat you, so do not succumb to drink." You can see here this is an interesting tablet for a number of reasons. There's the cylinder seal impressions identifying who it's being sent by are clearly all over what is really an outer envelope. During this period in Kanesh level 2, we see these tablets being put in envelopes that are sealed, clay envelopes. And again, the idea being that these are traveling very, very far distances and take quite a long time to arrive. And so by sealing them in an envelope, you're protecting the tablet from damage, from possible fraud, and also maintaining privacy. So we see this. And on the outside, right, we would have our cylinder seals, and then the certification of the seal, like who witnessed it actually being sealed. So the recipient could know for a fact that what inside was the real message being communicated. And these are small tablets too. These aren't as big as what we've seen before. Some are as small as 5 by 4 centimeters, things that are very small and easy to transport because, again, these are traveling a very, very long distance. These tablets would have been kept in the houses, probably stored in jars and boxes with labels to organize them, very similar to the archives that we saw at Ebla. And we also see a diversity of seal types being used during this period. This really speaks to this decentralized nature of the period and all the mercantile activity that's taking place at the time. Most of the tablets from Kanesh come from level 2. Some come from the level that comes right after, level 1B. And some actually come from the mound itself, that massive mound where the palace would have been. These public buildings of Kanesh, right? Outside of the Assyrian sphere of influence, we have the Assyrian lower city and the colony, and then the Anatolian palace, which is up on top of the mound. And so we see a number of different seal types. We see, for example, these old Assyrian seal types.